Hello and welcome to today's Thinking Thursday, which is going to be about Dorothy Arzner, who was one of the biggest Hollywood directors in the 1920s. So let's go back to the beginning of her life. So in San Francisco on the 3rd of January, 1897, she was born to Janetta Young and Louis Arzner, and then they all moved as a family to Hollywood, where Louis bought a cafe called the Hoffman Cafe, which was right next to a theatre. So all these actors and actresses were coming into the cafe all the time, which piqued Dorothy's interest. But she was very, very smart, and she decided she wanted to go on to be in medicine. So she studied, she went to the University of Southern California, and she was very, very smart, very, very good at what she was doing. But then she joined the ambulance corps during World War I, and then decided that was a bit much, which, to be fair, Dorothy's institution, the composition of her personality and body and mind were very strong. She was a smart cookie, and she was pretty tough, and she was pretty direct about how she wanted to do things. But World War I was 50 shades of effed up. So I completely understand that even someone who has such a capable and resilient capacity would also be like, you know what, I'm going to do something else. So after the ambulance corps, she then went looking for work elsewhere, and she got a job in a coffee wholesaler switchboard. So back in the day, when you wanted to order something, you had to call somewhere. And when you wanted to call somewhere, you had to deal with a switchboard worker. So literally a person who would take a cable plugged into a board here and then plug the other end of that cable into another pegboard here. And that's how you would make the connection. That's what she was doing. However, she'd also applied for another job, because her job at the switchboard for the coffee wholesaler was $12 an hour. But she'd seen an advert for a job with the film industry when Hollywood was kind of getting started that was for $15 an hour. And she decided, you know what, money's money, I'll give it a crack. So she applied, and she got the call saying that they would invite her to an interview while she was working on the switchboard. So she was literally at work plugging in a call, and they were like, this is a call for Dorothy Arzner. And she was like, yes, where do I plug this in? So while she was at work for the coffee wholesaler, she accepted an interview for Player Lasky, which was a film corporation from the early 20s and a little bit before the 1900s. So she then decided to go and interview for them purely based on the fact that her pay would be slightly larger. This was her film aspirations at the time. She was really just like, I need a paycheck. That's it. She was an incredibly independent woman and imbibed with so much initiative. There had been a flu pandemic that started in February 1918, which had wiped out millions of people. But this also meant that on top of World War I, there were just not very many workers left. So it was a lot easier to get a job back then. Cinema magazine actually published an interview with Dorothy in 1974, which included a transcript of the interview that she'd had with Player Lasky when she'd actually been interviewed by the head of the company. William DeMille ran everything. He was the big boss, and he actually interviewed this nobody coming for a complete no experience required job, which is insane. Firstly, to think that's how things were run at the time. That's just a lot more respect when the boss of everything comes and actually meets every single part of a company. But listen to what actually happened in the interview. It sounds unimaginable now. So Dorothy said, I think I'd like a job in the movies. And William responded, where do you think you'd like to start? And Dorothy said, I might be able to dress sets. And William then responded, what is the period of this furniture? Pointing to the furniture in his office. And she said, I don't know. And William DeMille responded, Franciscan, maybe you'd better look around for a week and talk to my secretary. She'll show you around the different departments. What? Literally, she suggested something that she might be able to do and then failed to be able to identify the period of furniture that would have been relevant to her job. And then he still said, just wander around for a week. Maybe you'll find something that you're capable of and passionate about. Like, what a dream world. Imagine if you had an interview where you literally walked into a company and was like, I think I'd like to work here. And they just said, just look around for a week. See if there's something you'd like to do. Go for it. What? Nowadays, it's like there's 1,000 applications for every single job. And only AI is really talking to you in order for you to have an interview. And then even when you do somehow get through robot brain speech in order to get an interview, you're then sat there knowing that you have an entire potentially school of people fighting for that job. And then you're assessed by someone who's maybe a lower down manager. Like, oh my gosh, this is just so crazy to think that this was how it was 100 years ago. So mad that, like, what? And think about how competitive Hollywood is now. My goodness, so crazy. But that's how she got her job in the film industry. And the reason she got her job in the film industry is because it was better paid than her corporate job. Mad. Even then, her first job was as a script typist for $15 an hour. And after 3 months, that also went up to $16.50 per hour. After 3 months? She got a pay rise after 3 months? Like, can we just go back to the good old days? Like, not even for the sake of like the amazing movies from the silver screen time when like every single element of what was on camera was like deeply metaphorical and like passionately thought out, but like, can we just go back to the film industry as it was then? Because that just sounds so much better for everyone, even behind the scenes. What happened? So anyway, she then went on to work on more than 50 films. She was working as an editor for Paramount Real Art Studios, and she was producing an 8-reel film. So like back in the day where it was actually like reels of celluloid film. She was producing one of those every 4 weeks, and ticket prices for the cinema back then were between 30 and 50 cents. And then she was working as a screenwriter, and in 1922 she worked on Blood and Sand, and she was actually uncredited for both her directing work and her screen work, even though during that film she filmed the bullfighter scenes herself. She actually filmed it. And during the filming of that, the director, James Cruz, saw her talent and directly requested her as an assistant director. So she was already doing the big job. She was taking on all the responsibility, but unfortunately she was uncredited for it. And then in 1923, she did The Covered Wagon. 1924, she did Sound Showmanship. 1925, she did The Red Kimono. Also didn't get her credit for that. She was earning about $500 per script. So this was a Monday. So she was doing well for herself. But then she became more of a recognized director. So by 1927, she was doing things like Fashion for Women, which was her first solo film. And then 1927, she also did Get Your Man and 10 Modern Commandments. 1928, she did Manhattan Cocktail. She was the first woman to join the American Directors Guild. Player Lasky went on to be renamed Paramount, which I'm sure you've heard of. And their first talkies, so the first film that they had, which had speech and sound included in the film, was in 1929, and it was called The Wild Party. And Dorothy was the director, but she didn't just direct. She did something that would change the film industry forever. So Clara Bow was the star, and at the time, if you wanted to record speech and sound in a film, you'd have to hide microphones in people's clothes, which meant that they had to stand awkwardly still because otherwise their clothes would rustle, or a cable would suddenly pull at the back of their costume, or they would be hidden in a piece of set, usually a fake plant, because a real plant would just die under the set lighting, which meant that everyone just had to awkwardly lean towards where the microphone was hidden, which looked very unnatural, but also if they accidentally leaned away, they would suddenly get quieter, and then they would get louder, and then they would get quieter. So in order to change this and give Clara Bow the opportunity to have natural movement through the space, Dorothy invented the boom microphone. She stuck a microphone on a retractable pole so that it could be hovered above Clara, just outside of where you would see on screen. And then Clara could move around the space with this microphone moving naturally above her. This changed the industry because it meant there wasn't this consistent fourth wall. The fourth wall being that you could kind of have an imaginary wall where you knew that this was just a play on screen. It removed that by allowing for natural movement that just looked like an extension of life, just happening just over there in front of your cinema seat. It changed the industry because without that natural movement, it became obvious that this was just a film. People don't lean into plant pots all the time or stand awkwardly still every time they have to speak. This movement allowed for Clara to also have freedom of expression. She became a better actress by the ability to move around the space and speak normally. This was a real innovation that changed the industry forever, but unfortunately, Dorothy is forgotten as the inventor of the boom microphone, even though the boom microphone is used consistently across all film industries around the world. It's a real essential part of film. Sometimes it does pop onto camera very, very occasionally. I think it was Little Women, where you just see a kind of dip of the boom mic at the top of the screen once. And there's like a few other films where it happens, and the same with TV. But apart from that, it just creates this dissolution and this dissolving of the fourth wall that otherwise we would be stuck with, where you'd always kind of know that these people were acting rather than just you being witness to life that's happening just over there, just some unreachable space that feels real to you anyway. She then went on to do things like in 1930, The Better Wife or Anybody's Woman. And I'm going to take a quote because I actually watched the film, and I'm going to take a quote from it because I think it's really interesting how she was starting to make commentary on sexism at the time, because she was also writing the script sometimes as well. So there's a male character who's talking to another male character as they're like observing two women across the way. And he says, "Women are too smart. They know how to be married, respected, protected, and free all at the same time." And I love this, the fact that she's creating this subtle commentary on how women are becoming more feminist in their natural state because they're understanding their own freedom and their own value, and the need to protect them but also have freedom, and they're becoming smart. I love this little like sneaky commentary that she's adding to her films. And remember that she was also inspiring someone who I take as an absolute icon, both in the film industry and as a queer icon, which was Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was watching this closely, and she was learning. So a lot of that feminist power that Katharine Hepburn went on to have came from Dorothy Arzner. In 1930, she did Paramount on Paradise. In 1930, she also did Sarah and Sons. In 1931, she did Honor Among Lovers. In 1931, she also did Working Girls, which is great, and it was written by Zoe Atkins. I really like that film. In 1932, Merrily We Go to Hell. In 1933, she did Christopher Strong, starring Katharine Hepburn. And I love a quote from Katharine Hepburn. I know I'm just a fan of her, so I'm going to sneak it in. I know I shouldn't, but I'm going to sneak it in, which was based around the fact that there was a lot of powerful creative women working around Katharine at the time. She was really inspired by women who were preceding her in the industry, but they were really setting up the space for feminism and the expression of female empowerment. And in that space, Katharine had the empowerment to make this incredible statement. She said, "If you want to sacrifice the admiration of many men for the criticism of one, go ahead, get married." That was just the empowerment that these women were enabling themselves. They were being paid well, they were being creatively free, they were being politically expressive in their art, and they were also supporting, bolstering, and encouraging each other. This is an amazing time for them, and they were really counterposing what we think of as women in the film industry as like these demure little cherubs who were kept in cages and then only let out in costume and barely had any lines. These films, if you watch these films, you really see that women are the star and they have some stuff to say. In 1934, Dorothy went on to film Nana, and then in 1936 she did Craig's Wife. In 1937 she did The Last Mrs. Cheney. In 1937 she also did The Bride Wore Red. In 1940 she did Dance Girl Dance, and in 1943 she did First Comes Courage. So she was really making films all the time. She's very consistent about it, but the way that she made films was innovative, empowering to women, and changing both the narrative of politics, but also how the industry worked and the freedom that people had of expression when they were creating films, because she created a literal tool, a piece of technology that allowed for that fourth wall to dissolve. Women's creative power in the film industry was then almost evaporated, because when the talkies came in, female directors and creators was slowly edged out. By the 1940s, there were 2 female directors, and that was Dorothy Arzner and Lois Weber. That was it. That was all you had for women you could work with. And then when Dorothy and Lois stopped, there were none. There were almost no female directors working in Hollywood for about 4 decades after Dorothy stopped. That was kind of it. I'm interested to understand why, because there did seem to be this really radical sudden closing of the doors to female creative directorial power within the film industry, but I'm not 100% sure why. It's understandable that the film industry slowed down during World War II because, people were not there. They were busy being killed in other countries, or they were having to take on the jobs that other people were doing. Everyone was slightly not focused on film at the time, kind of. There were also films being made, especially about war and stuff like that, but there was a bit of a boom in film after the Second World War. What happened? Why weren't women directors included in that boom? Why were there basically none after Lois and Dorothy? What happened? Now, this could be our old false friend, sexism, in which case, very disappointing. Don't understand it. You had some incredible directors at the time. Why did that not lead to just a string of empowered women following in their footsteps? But I don't really know. I don't really understand. Like, women were also into film. Women wanted to see film. Women wanted to direct film. So why? I don't really understand why there was decades of pretty much no female directors. But that's what happened. However, there is a very sunny side to this story because Dorothy had been in a very happy, very fulfilling relationship for 40 years by the end of her life. She was actually partnered, I would say like soul married or whatever the non-legal equivalent of married was, to a screenwriter and a choreographer called Marion Morgan. And they'd been together since 1927. And they were together all the way up until Marion's death in 1971. And the cute thing is that Marion was born in Paterson in New Jersey on the 4th of January in 1881, which was the day after Dorothy. So they had birthdays next to each other. I think that's so adorable. Marion died on the 10th of November 1971 in Los Angeles, California, with Dorothy at her side. And Dorothy then died within the same decade, but they'd spent 40 years happily and lovingly together. They were such a powerhouse of creativity and feminism and just pure love. Like, screw gender sometimes. Like, can we just let go of gender? And I know that I'm like a propagator of like, look at these amazing women. But you know what? It's not look at these amazing women. It's look at these amazing people forgotten by history. Sometimes because they were just women. But these two empowered beings found love and they marinated in it for 40 years and they produced so much creativity and empowering artwork and they moved industries forward and they did it all at the same time as being just a wonderful loving couple. I think that's so amazing. And there's a little bit of a mystery at the end of the story. So when Dorothy passed, she left behind an incomplete manuscript for a book which was all about the early settlers of Los Angeles, which I think is really interesting. She died on the 1st of October 1979, and I don't know if anyone's actually like made any efforts to try and finish the book, but I'd be so interested to find out if they had. So yeah, that's the story of Dorothy Arzner. But please, whenever you're watching a film, even though you can't see it in the screen, just know your ability to melt into the narrative of a story without being stuck with unnatural movement or speech on film is because of Dorothy's invention, and her ability to empower others in the film industry who came after her or who were overlapping with her, like Katharine Hepburn industry, was because she was such an empowered, smart and loved person. When you have decades of secure love, that really changes what you can do in the world because it sets a deep level of security within you. And I'm going to give you a quote to exemplify just how secure she was in herself as a director. So when she first started working in studios, she said, "When I went to work for a studio, I took my pride and made a nice little ball out of it and threw it right out of the window." So she's coming from a place of this isn't pride-based, this isn't ego-based. But then she said, when she was working as a director, "My philosophy is that to be a director, you cannot be subject to anyone, even the head of the studio. I threatened to quit each time I didn't get my way, but no one ever let me walk out." And I think that balance between letting go of your ego, letting pride go right out the window, but also being fiercely grounded in your directorial vision leads to changing the narrative. She was only capable of boldly changing both how the industry worked by her technological innovations, but also the stories that were being told by her capacity to be fully secure, bold, and grounded in her decision making. She was a pretty powerful lady. And so I hope that thinking about her and learning about her empowers you a little bit in your day.